We're joined by Debbie Bechtel, who's Associate Professor of Clinical Law Emerita at Brooklyn Law School, Stephen Erdman, who's Assistant Commissioner with the New York City Department of HPD, and you might hear that acronym HPD quite a bit today. Margie Brown, who's Executive Director of UHAB. Again, you might hear that acronym a bit today. And Guillermo Lara, who's a shareholder of a Housing Development Fund Corporation, otherwise known as an HDFC, which you also hear more about today. And he's a member of the UHAB, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board of Directors. Thank you all for coming. And we're also joined by my colleague Hanan El Youssef and Brandon Johnson, who are doing the magic behind the scenes. Next slide, please. So we're gonna have a welcome, and then we'll have a high-level introduction to the New York model and legal background from Debbie, and then Stephen will move into the regulatory framework and his role as a regulator. And UHAB's role as developer and supporter will be presented by Margie, so you can find out more what the steward or the intermediary, how that works. And then putting it into practice, you'll hear from Guillermo what it's really like and all the promises, whether they really come true about co-op and co-op living. So, and then we're going to leave Q&A to the end. And this is being recorded, and we will send the deck out to everyone who's registered. So if anyone has questions about that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just an introduction to Cooperative Development Foundation Affordable Housing Initiative. Cooperative Development Foundation is an 80-year-old nonprofit with a clear and concise mission to promote cooperative development and education. We work across all sectors, but we currently have this affordable housing initiative, and we work with the 4 organizations that are listed on the bottom as our advisors: National Association of Housing Co-ops, UHAB, which work on limited equity cooperatives, and then ROC USA, that works with manufactured home park cooperatives, and Grounded Solutions, which works with community land trust networks. And our initiative is basically to promote the preservation and development of permanently affordable housing through shared equity models, and to help educate policymakers, communities, and residents, anyone, about these models, to help them put them in their toolbox as they face the worst housing crisis we've probably ever faced, and demonstrate how shared equity can advance housing stability, racial justice, racial equity, apologies, and other outcomes. And then, of course, how we scale the model, what's to be needed. So that's a lot of what we're working on and trying to inform folks about those topics. Next slide, please. And shared equity housing can sort of mean different things, and there's often some vague definitions. We try and cast a fairly wide net, but we look at it as community ownership, whether entity or properties in which residents and community members lead in both governance and ownership. And that can sort of be interpreted different ways depending on the model and the setting. Next slide, please. And why shared equity housing? Because it provides permanently affordable ownership alternative to rental housing across the country, helps prevent displacement, promotes owner occupancy, and supports local workforce needs. And these are long-established models with proven benefits. So we think more people should know about them because they are established and proven, and there's an infrastructure in place to support them. Next slide, please. The benefits, one of the neat things I think about shared equity housing is looking at it from the individual and the community perspective. Sometimes people just think about housing as someone in a house or a family in a house, but houses are parts of communities, and shared equity housing really brings the community to the fore in affordability, stability, wealth, involvement, and improvement. So as you're supporting people, you're also supporting the communities in which we all live. Next slide, please. So the shared equity models that we've sort of been focused on, even though we're looking at more models than these. These are the ones we've kind of focused on. Those are limited equity affordable co-ops, which are the topic of today. We've also been working with Community Land Trust with affordable housing to see how they work and how they can be promoted more as a solution. And then resident-owned manufactured home community cooperatives. Next slide, please. So limited equity affordable cooperatives are basically a group of people who own through a cooperative corporation the housing in which they live. You own shares of the cooperative corporation like you would own shares of any cooperative, and then those shares entitle you to a right to lease a unit in that cooperative permanently. So it's collectively owned by the residents or shareholders. And then the limited comes in because mo these cooperatives really need subsidies because they're designed to be affordable and to really provide housing for low to moderate income folks. So the resale formula can be limited. The gain is limited in order to keep that permanent affordability. It's also democratically governed and cooperatively stewarded. Next slide, please. And while we know there are a lot in New York, there are 190,000 across the US, cooperative units. And as you can see, they're in many, many states. A lot of people just for some reason think they're just in New York, though New York does seem to do it very well. You find them across the country, and a lot of them are located in Chicago, Boston, Washington. But they're an option for everyone, and they can look different depending on where they're being developed. Next slide, please. I'm just going to touch on community land trusts and affordable housing only because there's a lot of interest in it, and we think there's a lot of opportunity to place cooperatives, limited equity cooperatives on community land trusts, sort of working the models together to speed up or to expand and to scale more easily. And many folks on this call might know this, but just a quick overview. Community Land Trust is basically, it's a nonprofit organization. That's all it is, with a mission to develop and steward land and properties for the benefit of lower income community members. So in terms of the affordable housing side of it, families, individuals purchase houses or an entity buys multifamily that sits on the land owned by the community land trust. So the purchase price is more affordable because the homeowner is only buying the house, not the land. And then the homeowners lease the land from the community land trust in a long-term renewable lease. And that allows sort of faster, more affordability and sort of a faster housing track. And the homeowners then agree to sell the home at a restricted price to keep it affordable in perpetuity. It's a control mechanism as well as as kind of a community system. Next slide, please. This is just how it works. We can go on to the next slide. So this is from one of our partners, Grounded Solutions Network. This is the Community Land Trust map. So you can kind of see the Community Land Trust, the cooperatives. There's some overlap, but you get a sense of the scale with Community Land Trusts that have affordable housing on it as well. And you can sort of see if in your area there's opportunities with Community Land Trusts. Next slide, please. And this just shows sort of the alignment between community land trusts and limited equity cooperatives. Now, again, I just wanted to throw that out there and we might touch on it, but for the most part, today is focused on the New York law and the New York history and infrastructure around limited equity cooperatives. So we can answer the question, why are there so many co-ops in New York? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Bechtel to give us the legal underpinnings. Thanks.
Oops. Okay. Start over. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Bechtel. I am basically retired professor from Brooklyn Law School, Emerita, and where I taught for 27 years a clinic where students represented low-income co-ops in transactional matters, not so much litigation. And before that, I was a staff attorney at a community development legal assistance center in New York, which represented low-income co-ops or these housing development fund corporations that we're going to talk about. And I started there in 1983, which was just after the city started selling buildings to tenants through the tenant interim lease program to become co-ops. So I've been involved with that segment of this whole discussion for a long time. And so I guess I'd just say as an overview, the focus here is on why the New York model has succeeded and what you might learn from it. And my role is going to be getting into the legal details. But I would say at the outset that the success in New York is attributable to a mixture of things. It's a mixture of things that we'll discuss. So it's not just having appropriate laws, it's not just having adequate technical systems, and it's not just having financial and tax exemption and regulation from your local government. Those are all important. But I would also say you don't have to have all those. I mean, you could proceed if you don't have all those, but that's kind of, the mix that's ideal. And our laws are not actually ideal, but I'm going to get into that. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start just thinking about why government is involved in housing co-ops. As Mary pointed out, a housing cooperative is a building owned by a corporation that sells shares to the residents who have rights to a particular unit set out in a long-term proprietary lease. So it's sort of why does the state care? Why can't you just form a corporation in Delaware and, hand out shares to people and say, now you're part owner of this building? One of the reasons for that is that, and this is actually my second point here, is that that government is concerned about consumers buying things without proper information, kind of what the SEC does. So if you're going to offer shares in a corporation that owns a building, government usually wants you to disclose what exactly is going on. What will the person own? How many shareholders? What's the ownership structure? What do the bylaws look like? What's the budget look like? So all that turns into what we know as an offering plan or some kind of prospectus, some kind of description of what this thing is. So the government I imagine many states will want to be involved in this way. And in addition, government is generally involved when a corporation is formed because they might dictate what approvals are needed, how the purposes might be limited, what's supposed to be in the certificate of incorporation and so forth. And then what goes usually with that same law is governing the operation of corporations. So the state might say some basics about proxy voting rights or how to call a meeting or how to demand financial records for shareholders. So the state will want to be involved in those various ways, and you'll find variations among the states, which things they have already done, and I'm sure that will vary a little bit from what we have. Next slide, please. So there also are special purpose corporations. Most states will have two basic types of business corporation and a not-for-profit corporation. Not-for-profit being more charitable purposes. And then under those, there might be special types of corporations. So within nonprofits, there might be education corporations that have a special purpose to do something related to education. Within business corporations, there might be something like what we have in New York, the private housing finance law, that allows a corporation to operate exclusively for operating low-income housing. So this is to say there are the two basic types of corporations generally, but you also might have special purpose corporations. A lot of states do have a housing cooperative statute. We actually don't in New York. We have only sort of the combination of things, the business corporation law and the regulations for co-ops. But Mary's gave me a list of, it looks like 25 states do have housing co-op statutes. Some states also have agricultural co-op statutes from way back when. And a few states do have specifically a limited equity co-op statute. And I guess the advantage of that is the definition is going to be clear because it's right there in the state statute. Maybe the downside is if you want to change that definition or do anything to it, you've got to go to the legislature and have it changed. So in New York, we don't have actually a definition in the law of limited equity co-op. It's happened as a matter of regulation by the city government of co-ops that are set up under the business corporation law and our private housing finance law. Next slide, please. So New York City co-op history. You may have heard that there were immigrants from Finland who created some co-ops way back in 1916, started the Finnish Home Building Association. They pulled funds, built housing, and created individual not-for-profit corporations to own those. The problem, then I should have noted this earlier, but in the difference between business corporations and not-for-profits, a business corporation is run by its shareholders, and they have something that they've purchased that they can sell, as we know about shareholders in other companies. Nonprofits generally can't have shareholders. They don't have something that's been sold to an individual that they own and can sell. So they can only have members. And that is to become a sort of traditional type of housing co-op, or what we've come to know as housing co-op, the Finnish associations they're a little different creature, and some of them have tried to change over to something that would be a shareholder type of corporation. So yeah, I should have highlighted that earlier, the difference between nonprofits and business corporations. And then 1955, Mitchell-Lama passes. I think that's two senators named Mitchell and Lama decided that some moderate income housing should be built. And so that's called Mitchell-Lama housing. I don't know this program as well, so people might correct me later, but there are regulations for the Mitchell-Lama statute that have quite a bit of detail about a surcharge added to the rent if income exceeds the limit. So you can stay, but if your income goes up, you have a surcharge on your rent. There's a specific waitlist process. There's quite a limited resale formula so that people really can just get back what they paid in plus a proportion of the amortization. And so that's actually stricter than we see in some of the other in the Housing Development Fund Corporation units, though the income limit may be slightly higher. What's been a big controversy is later in 1991, a buyout process was added so that the Mitchell-Lamas could vote to privatize. So that's another topic, but that's been a big controversy in New York. 1966, Article 11 of the Private Housing Finance Law passed, and that's the statute that allows corporations to be formed either under the nonprofit corporation law or the business corporation law. Sorry, I lost this slide went too fast. But anyway, with Article 11, it allows corporations to be formed that are operated exclusively to develop low-income housing. So that was then used to do some of the early, and still is used to do the co-ops that were done. Oh, sorry, could you go back a slide? And then one slide forward after this, sorry. Next slide, yes. Just municipal involvement. We have an assistant commissioner here who's going to talk about some of this. So just to go over quickly, they might sell properties to the co-ops They will hopefully provide real estate tax exemptions, provide loans, promulgate regulations, and require regulatory agreements, which you're going to hear more about. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to point out, and this goes with what Mary was talking about with community land trusts, that a lot of housing, that oftentimes these basic tools are combined. So housing advocates may come up with an approach, a type of model that they like, a certain, way for people to own, but still be controlled in some way outside of the entity. They may come up with some approach that the housing advocates like. Then they say to the lawyers, so can you, we want to make a mutual housing association. I don't think they're so popular anymore, although they're very much like community land trust. But anyway, they might say to the lawyers, so create this thing. The lawyers then are going to look at the laws of the state to see if that thing is defined and actually exists. And oftentimes it doesn't, because it's a combination of things that do exist in the state. So with community land trusts, there's a not-for-profit corporation that's formed that acts as an umbrella over either individual homes that are part of the land trust or co-ops that are part of the land trust. And the co-ops are probably business corporations with shareholders, as we talked about. So it's a combination of using the not-for-profit corporation and a business corporation for a co-op. And I guess I point this out just because sometimes when you talk to a lawyer, you might say, so we want to do co-housing. The lawyer might say, I don't, like, what's that? And then ask you, what is it that you want? You want for people to own something jointly in some way? Let's talk about how to do that. So there's sometimes the lawyer has to mix and match things that exist in the state to create. And on that point, if let's say you don't have, all you have is a business corporation law, you can form a business corporation and create a purpose that fits what you're hoping to do if it's a limited equity co-op. So you don't necessarily have to have a state law that defines what you want to do, as long as what you want to do fits within what you already have. Next slide, and I'm going to be almost at the end here. New York State specific, I've mentioned most of these, but these are the sites for the things that we've talked about. Our statute that says you can't offer a real estate interest without creating an offering prospectus is General Business Law 352 quadruple E. And it has been amplified by extensive regulations that talk about how you create an offering plan and how that has to be presented to the Attorney General. Then we have the private housing finance law. Article 11 has been used a lot and that's where those are called HDFCs. Article 2, Mitchell-Lama, and Article 5 is redevelopment corporations. And we don't have a definition of co-op. We don't have a statute called the housing co-op statute. We do have a condo statute. And you'll find, each state will vary in that sense. It doesn't mean you can't do them, but it just means as far as a legal definition, it might not be there in your existing statutes. I guess to wrap up, I would say, we have kind of a confusing assortment of low-income definitions and resale policies in New York, and sort of a hodgepodge of state and city programs. So it's not perfect. But I'd say the strongest things are the commitment from city government to limited equity co-ops, and the technical assistance, primarily through UHAB for the co-ops. Looking back, I would say more attention should have been paid to consistent, easy to implement real estate tax exemptions. More attention should have been paid to emergency funding sources and consistent resale policies that would be more transparent, so that everyone would know what the resale policy is in a particular building. And I think it's at the end, it's mentioned, but I have an article that goes over a lot of this. If you want to read more, it's in the State Bar Affordable Housing Journal, and it's referenced below. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn over to um, Steve Erdman, I think. Yes.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. Okay, so as Mary mentioned before, I'm Stephen Erdman. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Homeownership Opportunities and Preservation, and I help oversee programs that we use at HPD to create new HDFC co-ops, as well as all of our projects involving community land trusts. So we have a team that works on our shared equity housing projects. Next slide, please. So just we kind of already went into this in Debbie's section here, but some high level, the landscape here for shared equity housing in New York City. We have about 25,000 apartments in 1,200 buildings that are organized as HDFC co-ops. Most of these are about 20 units each. And many of them went through programs that converted low-income rental buildings into cooperative ownership. One of the biggest programs that existed for a while is the tenant interim lease program that created most of these co-ops. And later on in my section, I'm going to talk about the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program, which is continuing that work. There are some new construction co-ops that have been created over the years. And currently we create co-ops via the Open Door program, which I'll also go into more detail about. And then separately, there's about 69,000 co-ops in Michelamas. These had been developed from the mid 50s to the early 80s. And we still have a very large Michelama portfolio that HPD is working with. Many of these buildings are in need of capital repairs at this time. And so they make up a really big portion of the preservation work that HPD is doing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so when we think about our cooperatively owned housing, we often try to keep at the forefront of our mind what the goal is of cooperatively owned housing. We certainly have a goal of resident empowerment and self-determination. And I think Margie is going to speak more about that in her section. We also have a goal of wealth building, which Debbie mentioned, some concerns about resale restrictions and inconsistency among resale restrictions. The last goal that I think is very common we think about is long-term affordability. So we want the cooperatively owned housing to remain an affordable resource for a long time. So the wealth building and the affordability are somewhat in conflict with each other, and that's where the resale restrictions are really important. They're the tool we use to balance those goals. And we've been doing a lot of work actually at HPD recently to consider our resale restrictions across different programs and try to bring about more consistency. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail right now, but just wanted to mention that it's something that's at the forefront of our mind as I instead focus on long-term affordability over the next few slides. So if we're trying to protect affordable housing forever, one of the challenges is that forever is a really big concept. And so one of the ways we try to create durable affordability restrictions is by layering different approaches. So starting at the bottom of this image, most HPD projects are owned by HDFCs, which Debbie had described. Primarily the nonprofit HDFC, which is an entity that's used to own affordable housing. So nonprofit HDFCs, their corporate purpose is to provide affordable housing. When we're talking about co-ops, these are business corporation law HDFCs, which also have a corporate purpose of providing affordable housing. but just in a little bit different structure with the resident ownership of the project. You can just stay on that prior slide. And so that is like the foundational level for maintaining affordability, is the incorporation of these entities that own the affordable housing. So any HDFC via its formation is supervised by HPD pursuant to Article 11 of Private Housing Finance Law. We're supervising these entities to make sure that they are providing housing for persons of low income, which is defined in statute as below 165% of AMI, and that if they are being dissolved, that the sale of their assets, any proceeds from those sales, are used to support affordable housing initiatives. So that's kind of the first layer. Then most HPD projects and all of our projects with co-ops have regulatory agreements. So on top of the supervision that HPD is providing, we're also seeking to regulate cooperative housing. Our regulatory agreements are signed by co-ops in exchange for the capital financing we provide, as well as the tax exemptions that we provide. We do provide full property tax exemptions to most of our co-ops that we're creating today. In the past, there were partial exemptions or no exemptions for some co-ops. Many of the co-ops that were created in the past also did not have regulatory agreements. The goals of the regulatory agreement are to preserve the affordable housing and also to make sure that buildings are operated successfully. So they include requirements like income restrictions on who lives in the building, resale price restrictions, like I mentioned earlier, owner occupancy requirements to make sure people aren't Airbnb-ing out their units and subletting their units in violation to the spirit of the purpose of the housing, minimum maintenance increases to make sure that the co-ops are generating enough revenue to pay for their operations, and also requirements to work with what we call co-op monitors, who are there to assist the co-ops in complying with all of HPD's requirements. Okay, and then lastly is that all of this could be combined with the CLT structure, which Debbie spoke about, where we would put an HDFC co-op on a ground lease with the CLT. That ground lease empowers the CLT to also provide oversight of the co-op as well as support. And as the kind of landlord for the co-op, the CLT has some real power to ensure proper operations and compliance with the requirements in HPD's regulatory agreement. Okay, the next slide. So this diagram shows how some of these concepts come together in a regulatory framework for a project we may have with an HDFC co-op. So here depicted is what the regulatory framework would look like if a co-op is on a CLT. But you can also imagine it without this CLT piece. So in both scenarios, we have a regulatory agreement with the co-op. If a CLT is involved, the CLT is also a party to that regulatory agreement. And if a CLT is involved, there's a ground lease with the co-op. HPD also then puts our capital loan that we've provided to the co-op to pay to renovate the building or to construct the building. That serves as an enforcement. So it has a 30 to 60-year term. Typically, it's a 40-year term that matches the tax exemption term. And if the co-op fails to comply with our regulatory requirements, we could call due that debt. We otherwise wouldn't plan to call it due, and there's no payment. It just sits there as an enforcement. If a CLT is not involved, then HPD is enforcing its regulatory agreement directly with the co-op. We're often working with co-op monitors to enforce. So we ask the monitors to let us know if there's a problem. The monitors don't have power themselves, so HPD would have to exert its power via the regulatory agreement if there's a problem to try to bring about a resolution. If there's a CLT involved, we would really be turning to the CLT to be providing these monitoring functions. And the CLT does have power because it owns the land beneath the co-op. So HPD may actually lean on the CLT to enforce restrictions first. We would want the CLT to work with the co-op to bring them into compliance with our requirements. And we would hope that a CLT might do a little bit better job than we would do because they're on the ground, they have representation from the co-op, they're part of the community. We would be leaning on the CLT to do that work. In a worst case scenario, a CLT could take over the board of the co-op and bring about resolution to whatever non-compliance there may be, and then return control back to the shareholders of the co-op once a resolution is established. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the two programs that we have right now that are creating new co-ops include the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program and the Open Door Program, which I had mentioned. So ANCP is a pretty unique program where we are gut rehabbing a portfolio of city-owned buildings that are currently occupied by low-income tenants and converting them into resident-owned cooperatives for those tenants to own. These are TIL buildings, tenant interim lease buildings, that entered city ownership during the late 70s to early 2000s when the city foreclosed on tax delinquent properties via in-rem foreclosures, and enabled the tenants to apply to participate in the program and be rehabbed and converted into co-ops. We stopped using the TIL program to renovate the buildings in the mid-2000s and launched ANCP, which had some major changes to it, but a lot of the same constructs are part of ANCP that have been part of TIL. Namely, that most tenants are eligible to purchase their rehab units for as low as $250. So higher income tenants may have to pay $2,500, which is still a pretty great price for a rehab unit in many of the neighborhoods that these buildings are located. If residents aren't able to afford the monthly maintenance, we do offer Section 8 to them to make sure that any resident who is part of the building has access to the homeownership opportunity. And then vacant units are sold to new purchasers, typically around 80% of AMI. So those purchase prices are at like $200,000 to $300,000, which is a steep discount to the market, but would require a new purchaser to obtain a mortgage and maybe also obtain down payment assistance to purchase the home. This program is HPD's most expensive, and we currently provide about $500,000 per unit in capital subsidies to make these conversions possible and to make these purchase prices possible. And we also are heavily involving the residents in the decision making. They are reviewing and approving designs for their units as well as finishes. We also have them vote to select a developer that they work with. They're participating in co-op training classes so that they understand how to run the buildings once they take ownership. So we are really trying to make it a resident-centered program. The Open Door program is much simpler. We don't have existing residents here. This is ground up new construction for multifamily co-ops. We also do some 1 to 4 family homes, but most of our work is with multifamily co-ops. Our projects are typically affordable between 60 and 110% of AMI. And our subsidy need is a little lower because the purchase prices are typically higher in these co-ops than in ANCP. So we're paying about $200,000 to $400,000 per unit. We also, in ANCP, are paying for relocation costs for all the tenants, which is part of why those projects are so expensive. And in Open Door, even though it's ground up new construction, we have no relocation costs. Most of the Open Door projects are also on city-owned property, but they're vacant parcels, which we're conveying for $1 to a developer who receives a developer fee in exchange for creating the building. And many of our Open Door co-ops and 1 to 4 family homes, we are actually combining with the CLT model. We have not done that yet in ANCP, although it is possible that we would put an ANCP co-op on a CLT, but that would be a decision made in consultation with the residents. Okay, next slide. Oh, and I'm done. So thank you. I will pass it over to Margie now.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Debbie. I work closely with Debbie and Stephen all the time, and it's still educational every time I hear you guys speak. I feel like you hear something new every time, so thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I am Margie Brown. I'm Executive Director at UHAB. UHAB is a not-for-profit organization that has been around for 50 years with the goal of creating and supporting affordable cooperative housing. I'm going to go through a number of different functions that UHAB plays in developing and supporting cooperatives. The thing that I'll say about it is, with all the things that I talk about here, I'm still not touching on everything we do. I have been at UHAB for about 2.5 years. I had worked with UHAB in prior roles, and kind of watched UHAB from a lot of different work that I did in the past. And when I came to UHAB, one of the things that I found striking was that I thought I really knew the organization. And I day after day kept saying, we do what? UHAB, I have this kind of like mental image of UHAB. Our role is kind of like running water. We fill in all of the gaps and cracks in the landscape of affordable co-ops to make sure that they can be affordable and sustainable for the long term. Next slide, please. So one of our primary roles is co-op development. And I will say the development that we do directly is really focused on turning distressed rental buildings into affordable co-ops, into rehabilitated, healthy homes for people, for renters to become homeowners in the buildings where they already live. We have been the direct developer on about 100 buildings with close to 2,000 units in those buildings. However, Stephen had mentioned earlier that there are about 25,000 HDFC units across about 1,200 co-ops in the city, and UHAB has played some role in the creation of almost all of those units. We do training with buildings. We help before there was the role of actual developer in buildings when tenants were more responsible for the rehab of their homes. You have helped to shepherd them through that. So this 100 buildings is where we have actually done the work of being the developer who brings the development team and contractor together to actually rehab the buildings. That portion of the work is the real estate development. We always say that our work is as much about people development, though, as it is about real estate development. So as the building is being rehabilitated and becoming a healthy environment, we are also making sure that the people are coming together as a healthy cooperative to be able to work together and understand the governance functions and the physical and financial management functions as well of co-ops before they actually take ownership. So the resident engagement there is just such a key piece of making sure that co-op development is successful. But resident engagement is about democratic participation. And so resident choice is really important in all of this too. Stephen spoke to how HPD's programs are really trying to put an emphasis on residents' choice. Part of that is in the design and in who is developer, which is great. We're considered for being considered right now actually for to be a developer on certain buildings, and we would love to get that role, but we love that the tenants get to choose who the developer is. Part of that choice is also in the end, do they become a co-op? The vast majority of buildings that we have worked with and the vast majority of buildings that have gone through the TIL and ANCP programs and other programs where tenants could petition to become a co-op do successfully become a co-op in the end. But the choice for tenants to go through that process and then say, you know what, this isn't for us. There are advantages to being rental. We want to stay a rental. That is something that as a supporter of community-controlled housing, you have to be open to. And so that is something that is kind of a key piece of our development too, making sure that the residents have that choice. Next slide, please. So after a co-op is developed, the stewardship of co-ops for the long term is what makes a co-op successful. It is the responsibilities of the shareholders and board to come together to do the physical and asset management of a building, the financial management, and the governance. There are both requirements in the law in terms of what the governance looks like. There's requirements in law in terms of like code compliance and things like that. But there are also the piece of the co-op deciding what they want their governance and what they want their financial management to look like. And UHAB is here to support a lot of that. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest things that we do, and this is again during the process of while co-ops are developed, but then especially for the ongoing maintenance of co-ops and sustainability, we provide training. UHAB has free open trainings almost every weeknight and some weekend days to make sure that co-ops and shareholders have the knowledge that they need to steward their buildings with an informed approach. And that it's not just the board that is controlling everything, but that each shareholder is able to participate with an informed perspective. We have training topics on, I say over 80 here. I think we're actually up to 90 different topics. And these are just a few samplings of what they are. They kind of fall into those same categories of physical management, financial management, and governance. But there is such nuance to all of those things. A key one is does a co-op self-manage versus third-party management, and understanding the challenges and the advantages of both those approaches. Cost containment strategies is so important for financial management, and there is right now one of the biggest challenges for co-ops is increasing costs, particularly fuel and insurance. But just the general maintenance of buildings being much higher than it used to be too. So having really well-honed cost containment strategies is so important. Effective board meetings and election procedures. All of those things, I will point out, wills and estates is actually our most in-demand training because to make sure that as a shareholder, you have a will so that the co-op knows what is to happen with your property and your shares when you pass away, and that resource is there for your family if you're handing it down to your family. So that's the big topic. I will say we have everything down to like who is responsible for remediation of bed bugs. We have a course called Who Fixes What. This is just to give an idea of like once you get into the actual stewardship of co-ops, the questions that come up and the base of knowledge that you need is just so broad. So making sure that the shareholders who initially take ownership of the units and then those that come in over time have that education is one of our primary functions. Next slide, please. Co-op monitoring and technical assistance. Stephen had brought up that for co-ops with regulatory agreements, there is often the requirement of an actual monitor to make sure that they are in compliance with the corporate and regulatory structures and statutory and even other laws that aren't directly the co-op laws, but that as new laws come up that affect co-ops, that they are in compliance. So a portion of the co-op monitoring and our technical assistance too is to keep up with the changing laws, keep up with changing regulations, and to make sure that we are informed as an organization and then pushing out that education to co-ops and shareholders. We do a lot of work with co-ops on financial management. Some of that is just the basics of co-op budgeting and making sure that the budget is enacted in the proper way, that shareholders are aware of it, that they're voting on the budget. And then bookkeeping as well. How does the bookkeeping for co-ops, for the business of being a co-op, work? We actually provide direct bookkeeping services as well. Always we want co-ops to be informed. So part of what we really try to do with our own bookkeeping services is to make sure that the treasurer and the board and even the shareholders are active participants and learning the bookkeeping even as we help them to manage it. And just for a sense of scale, we do bookkeeping on about 200 of the 1,200 HDFCs that are out there. Similar to our open trainings, we also do tailored trainings for each individual building that we're either monitoring or that comes to us for that service. It helps us to be able to kind of like take those topics that we have for a broad audience and to home in on like what particular things are most needed for this building and how do certain topics play out, particularly for the dynamics of what's going on in the building. And then our technical assistance. We provide mostly free one-on-one, on-call technical support on a daily basis to co-ops. We are very fortunate to have a contract with the city and other philanthropic funding to be able to provide that free assistance and to make sure that as questions arise, co-ops have a resource to go to be able to address those things in real time. Next slide. We have a co-op improvement program, and this is really taking the training and the technical assistance and doing a deep dive with buildings that are showing signs of distress. And so that can be physical distress, it can be financial distress. In some cases, it's more problems with the board not coming together or the shareholders that have gotten into conflict. And have not been able to steward their building properly. In other cases, that physical and financial distress is really about, again, the really skyrocketing costs that we're seeing and how to continue to manage the finances of a co-op with those challenges. And the physical distress, one thing I want to point out is the city has done a really great job of bringing up the level of rehab that buildings get when they go through city programs. Stephen was saying that the ANCP program and some of the co-op programs really are some of the more expensive programs that the city does. Transforming distressed housing into healthy housing and making sure that tenants still have the opportunity to live there. And dealing with the challenges of occupied rehab or relocation during rehab is really very expensive. But that investment is so important. And the level of investment in co-ops really used to be much, much less. This is all to say that the physical needs of buildings at this point really are very significant. And so to make sure that buildings have the resources that they need to get the reinvestment that they need and to make it through the process of reinvestment. Applying for those loans is difficult, and finding kind of the right package of financing that is going to get them to where they need to be is a lot. So having really intensive tailored intervention for buildings that are at that point and need that intervention is an important part of what we do. I do want to say too that I have it almost here as a footnote that we help co-ops explore renewable energy and electrified heat. Really, that has become its own program, again, kind of to the point that we need to adapt and we need to grow programming where co-ops need it. Our climate and resiliency programming has become a huge area for us. Again, because of the fact that energy costs are so high, and that so many of these buildings are older housing stock that really did not get broad scale renovation, or that the renovation was so long ago that the systems really just need to be replaced at this time. The renewable energy and electrified heat is just a super important item for co-ops at this time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. One of the ways in which I just love how again you have had adapted to just meet the needs of the market is with providing share loans. We have a CDFI called Homeownership Lending that was specifically created to make sure that there is a loan product for co-op shares. Traditional mortgage products really just are not appropriately sized or priced for co-ops. Traditional mortgages tend to be much larger than co-op shares. The whole point of HDFC co-ops is that they are more affordable. Often they are less than $100,000, whereas particularly in New York City, mortgage products, banks are really looking for multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars as their loan product. Also, banks tend not to be familiar with the co-op model, and particularly affordable co-ops. And so when banks are not as familiar with it, they see risk, and that translates into higher interest rates and higher fees. So there really needed to be a product that was tailored to affordable co-ops and made sure that there was an option available. In a lot of cases, particularly in the past, cash purchases were how co-ops were sold. And while the shares cost less than a traditional mortgage, we want to make sure that people don't need tens of thousands of dollars saved up, because it really has an impact on who can purchase. Our share loans really were tailored to the needs of both co-ops and low and moderate income homeowners to make sure that a smaller size, lower cost loan was available. Next slide. Another thing that is so important in the work we do is cooperation amongst cooperatives, bringing co-ops together as a community for a few things. Number one, to increase purchasing power. UHAB has programs to collectively purchase fuel and insurance, which again are really co-ops' largest costs. To make sure that we're getting the best prices, the economies of scale for co-ops for those costs. We bring co-ops together also just for peer-to-peer learning. Our training is helpful, but the training of other shareholders in co-ops is always going to be the most informed. Fostering community, co-ops are spread throughout the city, and so making sure that co-op shareholders know each other and have community together. But also building community power and advancing collective political interest. Right now, for instance, the topic before was brought up about tax exemptions. And the primary tax exemption for co-ops is currently expiring. I might be having a connection problem.
We can still hear you, Margie.
You can, okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I will keep going. Our number one political agenda right now is the damp tax cap. This is the tax exemption that has supported HDFCs and is expiring in 2029. And we are helping to organize co-ops to make sure that that exemption is renewed, and that, as Debbie mentioned, there's been some inequities in that, and so that is renewed in the best form possible. Next slide, please. And so another thing that we do is tenant and community organizing. And some folks ask me, like, what is the role of tenant and community organizing for UHAB? How does that fit with the rest of being a co-op developer and supporting co-ops for the long term? But I can't emphasize enough that the tenant and community organizing is such a core part of how we got to where we are today. Really, the legal structures that Debbie talked about, the agency programming, really all started with the core movement of tenants coming together and saying, we deserve to have rights in our housing. We deserve to have community control. And particularly during the fiscal crisis of the 70s and abandonment and disinvestment of the 70s and 80s, for people to want ownership of their own homes. None of this would have been possible without UHAB and other organizations coming together to create that tenant power. And to kind of see this this whole presentation together, and the results of where that has gotten us is just inspiring in terms of the importance of that and continuing that. And so that is another thing that UHAB really centers as part of our work. I'm going to turn it over now to Guillermo to talk about the shareholders' experience in co-ops, which is really the most important part of this presentation.
Thank you, Margie. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we can move to the second slide, please. All right. Yeah, my name again, Guillermo Lara. I'm a shareholder of a housing co-op in Harlem, and I'm also a member of UHAB. This is a great innovation. I celebrated that a lot because that means the entire system is kind of receiving feedback from the actual beneficiaries, from the users, the end users of the housing affordability program, right? So for me, that was very encouraging, and I hope that we can transfer to UHAB and everybody else the benefits of this model, and probably give some kind of hints as to what are the challenges and positive experiences we have had in such a way that the whole thing can be improved overall, right? I will start with the a second slide, if you help me with that. All right. As that was talked about before, this is a cooperative. So as such, I have emphasized myself and others around me that being a co-op requires us to be understanding and applying the principle of cooperativism, which are there, right? Mainly, I will focus on two things there, which is member economic participation, which is member participation overall, and education, training, and information. To me, those are the key issues, besides an extension of that being concern for community and cooperation among cooperatives, right? That is kind of the extensive work that we are committed to do. So this is according to, these principles are according to the International Cooperative Alliance. I need to give credit to them for that. I understand this activity of being a shareholder or cooperator in this role of member of the board for at least 10 years in the co-op I belong to, enjoying my home ownership and being able to participate at the board level and membership activities. Also very devoted to trying to improve our processes and extending these experiences to other HTFCs and co-ops by sharing experiences. My firm belief at this point, after all these years, being working at the board level, is that shareholders and cooperators effectively contribute to develop their co-ops and achieve affordable housing by putting into practice the cooperative principles. That is the key stone for me in order to be working with the co-ops, right? Can we move to the second one? The next one, I mean. Okay, so I will emphasize the idea that we need to get educated, trained, and informed about our co-op. This is mainly what I have done myself and what I want to share with everybody else. This is the main type of activity, I would say, gives us the capacity to be able to make our co-op better and efficient, right? We need to go through the governing documents, read all of them. It takes time, but it gives you a lot of information and details as to how and the why it works. Same thing, and more importantly, the financial documents. To me, being a math teacher for quite some time, numbers tell stories. So if I can be able to get the financial reports, make analysis, derive some kind of statistics from there, that will provide me with the tools to be able to run possibilities and create budgets, right? So it means we need to check the story of the things, be able to analyze the figures, and then with the numbers, project how we are going to probably end up, and then present some kind of ideas or strategies to change the course if that is what we need to do, or adjust the activities for later on, right? So this is basically the meaning of this chart here. Being able to read and understand governing documents, financial documents, deriving some information to act, to make decisions, and then build statistics. And after that, just project by using forecasting and budgets so we can act for the next immediate future and then the long term. All right, can we move to the next one? Okay, this is our environment for obtaining the information, education, and training. We need to deal with everybody else, right? Our partners in the environment. We're talking about the HDFC cooperative in the center of this, with our shareholders. We need to deal with we need to get to know our own building, the structure, the systems that operate in the building. We need to familiarize with it. Then get in relationship with our building manager. This is a good experience for me to think that the fact that we hire someone to administer and operate the building is not enough, because we may have someone well paid, but the individuals sitting at their desks are not the ones who are actually in the building. So I learned that we need to get involved in this part, because it is us who express what is the need that we have here for fixing things or repairing things, and we know the location of that stuff. When we get involved in that way, the operation of the building manager is much better and we save money. Believe me, I have found things that indicate that it's a positive action to get involved in that part. We also deal with our staff, right? With EUHAV, which is our monitor and service provider in the aspects that were already mentioned by Margie, is very, very helpful. I would say not institution to serve us, but rather it's a partner in our development. That is the way I conceive that role. EUHAV is a partner to us to develop our co-op and to take us to the process of administering the co-op. We also deal with our municipal agencies related. If we have the regulatory agreement, we need to deal, of course, with HPD. Stephen talked about those things already. We need to deal with DOB when it comes to permits or things like that. In some situations that we need to get involved as well to expedite issues. They may get some kind of situations where it goes to 8.2 red kind of that red taping that may just stop us from doing something because of going back and forth with paperwork. Simple things, but they need attention. And as I mentioned before, our shareholder base is actually made out by our residents, which are shareholders, and in some cases, renters and commercial tenants, right? So we need to deal with all of those institutions and individuals, and that is all the environment in which we operate and from which we get our knowledge, and from where we need to derive our knowledge and expertise to be able to administer the co-op. But we need to get involved, definitely. There is no other way to do that. Can we move to the next one, please? Okay, numbers tell the story. I didn't want to complicate your life by looking at sophisticated charts, but this is kind of the simplification, right? Everybody just mentioned before, Debbie mentioned this, Margit talked about this as well. We are a non-for-profit, so our end point here is we are not for profit, so we are supposed to operate on a balanced budget, meaning the money we receive should be able to cover our expenses, including certain reserves for future needs, right? When something happens that puts this out of balance, we are in trouble. So basically, at the level of revenue and income, we have the money coming from our shareholders in the form of maintenance. We have our residential rentals. Those are individuals who are not shareholders, but still occupy the buildings. And we may have commercial rentals as well in any kind of that type of commercial spaces that a building may have. One big impact that may have the behavior of any source of payment or income here is the concept called timely payment of their obligations. If something in this item comes behind in time, it delays the cash flow in and may cause trouble later, right? So that means we're going to be in balance for the short term, or who knows, probably the long term. When it comes to the next line, which is operating expenses, big items here actually are heating oil, as was mentioned before. If we had in our building other type of heating system, electrical, then our electricity bill will be the most probably important charge there. We also have high water consumption and insurance, professional services, the staff, etc. Those are the main kind of items in the expense side. So we need to keep an eye on how those items behave over time, what is the regularity of those things, and then we need to act to, as Margie mentioned, try to apply cost-containing actions there. That is key in order for us to be actually successful with affordability, right? Yes. Also, the line of expenses is our debt services. If we have obligations to pay, mortgages or funds that were loaned to us by any private entity, any bank, or even HPD, we need to take care of this in a timely manner. Otherwise, we may be subject to default interest rates that may work negatively, because that will elevate our expenses rather than helping us. Okay, so from here, we may kind of infer what may happen if we get some kind of either income reduce or expenses increase. The balance won't operate and we're going to be in a big trouble. big trouble to operate. Let me just indicate, just using this chart, how the lack of a tax exemption may hit a building. Let's suppose that we are dealing with a building that has 30 units, meaning 30 apartments, and the building has a taxable assessed value of 2,100,000. Just the line that the city uses to determine the tax, the property tax. If we are in that situation, taxable assessed value equal 2,100,000 at a rate of 12%, that means that in a year, we will be subject to a 250,000 property tax. Can you imagine if our revenue income is balanced with the expenses, and we have a net cash operating flow of zero or kind of slight amount there, get hit with a 250,000 more, that will be a huge impact on the mainly shareholders. Maintenance. Let's suppose that the average maintenance being paid for a year is 1,800 in that building, 30 units. That means that $700, which is the contribution of that 250,000 costs per year per shareholder, and per month, I mean $700 per month per shareholder. That will mean 700 over 1,800 will be about 39% increase. That is unbearable from the affordability maintenance standpoint. It's going to be a lot of money for someone who pays 1,800 to be added 700 in a monthly bill. Unbearable at all. So we need to be prepared for that. If our tax exemption is about to expire, we need to act urgently on that, right? If it is going to be expired in a few years, we'd rather prepare for that. So that is basically my contribution on that, making you aware that through this process, we have used all the resources that we have. Our experience has been positive. We have used the resources that are allowed for us, and we are involved in the administration of the building, and we should encourage other shareholders and other HDFCs to do the same in order to actually take advantage of what the system offers us. Okay, I think this is my time.
It looks like it is. Thank you so much. That was great to hear, and it's great to sort of see in action how cooperatives take over in so many different ways, the board members, the residents, including financial. And it's very empowering for the residents and the communities to think about these folks being in control of where they live. Most of the questions have been answered that have been in the chat, with the exception of a couple. Just wanted to get at one question, like what can the federal government do, or how can we get more support at the federal level? I think we all know what needs to be done for that. We need to raise our voices. There is the Section 213 Cooperative Insurance Program, which we would like to see much more well utilized, and folks at UHAB and other places are trying to get it utilized more now. But I guess we can all, we do things like this to lift it up. I did want to come back to, unless other people have some questions, I wanted to come back to asking Stephen, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot. From the regulatory perspective, if you were talking to another regulator or someone in a Department of Housing Community Development, what would be sort of the key arguments you would say that they could make to their higher ups for why this is a really good approach to housing, and what they might think about in terms of finding or repurposing funds in order to promote this kind of housing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we are often asked this question because, like, why should we do community controlled affordable housing rather than just low income rental housing? Especially because the programs we use to create it are really our most expensive programs. In some measures, we could finance like 2 low income rental housing units for 1 affordable homeownership unit that's part of a co-op. So we do have to defend kind of what are we buying with our capital dollars, and what are we protecting with our regulation above and beyond what we can achieve with affordable rental housing. And so I often emphasize that, affordable rental housing, we are providing security of tenure to low income people, which is of immense value. Another way we could achieve some of the goals of community controlled housing is via down payment assistance. We just increase access to existing homeownership opportunities, and people can control their own housing as part of existing co-ops, whether or not they're HDFC co-ops, as well as other condos or 1 to 3 family homes in New York. And we do have down payment assistance programs at HP that we operate. So down payment assistance is really just buying like a wealth building opportunity or control for an individual as part of homeownership. When we have our affordable homeownership programs, we're buying that security of tenure and that long-term affordability that we achieve with rental housing, but we're also buying that wealth building and control that we can achieve via down payment assistance. And we're also increasing the housing supply, which we're not doing with down payment assistance. So we're kind of checking 3 major tick boxes off with the subsidy that we spend on creating new affordable homeownership opportunities and the efforts that we expend on regulating those opportunities and making sure that they're remaining valuable resources for the public into the future.
Can I chime in with something here? So I do want to kind of pull apart that there's a couple of factors that contribute to the at least the specific type of cooperative housing that that we're doing being so expensive. One of those is that we are a lot of the development tends to be of some of the most distressed housing in the city. And so that by its own nature is very expensive. So a rental of that is going to be more expensive than a regular rental as well. But we're getting that added value of that we're transforming the city's deteriorating housing stock while we're also creating homeownership. That's just such a win-win and worth that price. But another thing that makes it more expensive is that there are more federal options for rental housing. So in particular, the low-income housing tax credit has just, it has been the tool to create affordable rental housing across the US. And really is, an investment vehicle to be able to do that. The low-income housing tax credit in its current and primary form doesn't really work for co-ops. But having a tax credit that works for co-ops is, I think, a huge federal agenda item. But also some of the other tools that are used in rental housing are just not as commonly applied to co-ops. So home funds work really well in co-ops, but home funds, there's a lot of demand for it. And again, that's a federal resource. But making sure that, again, what can we do at the federal level? Making sure that there are resources just to develop the same types of cooperative housing that we develop now does make it less expensive and more possible to do at scale.
Great, thank you. And there's a lot of discussion about how to tweak and how the low-income housing tax credit program can work better. So I think a lot of it is informing. A lot of it is actually working with affordable housing advocates to ensure that these models get much more integrated into the public policy discussion about affordable housing. And so we're moving the debate from not just affordable housing or single family ownership, but we're moving it to how can communities create permanently affordable housing. And that is often lost in many of these discussions. So I think the more we raise up the permanently affordable, the more we might be able to nudge forward. There was also a question about Representative Bowman, who had been in the Co-op City district. He had introduced a cooperative housing bill, and I do believe there's been another cooperative housing bill introduced in Congress. I just don't have the name on the top of my head. If anyone on the call does know who supported that, because we did have a question about that. But if not, just please reach out to us separately and I can get you that information. Do other people have more questions? It's coming to the end, and we want to make sure this has been recorded, so please share with your colleagues. We'll share it because I think there's some great information. And I see there's one, I'm trying to see, I can't see on my screen these messages. Lot of tiny home communities springing up in distressed urban areas. There is like a cooperative tiny home movement that they're trying to form cooperatives with tiny homes. There's one in Seattle, I think, and I noticed that there's sort of an association that is definitely a model. I think the co-ops could be a model for just about anything. But I think finding funding and getting people more educated about. If anybody has if they want to share any other ideas or things they've seen from their communities, feel free to do that. But so I'm looking, trying to see if there's any new questions. But I think, and I'll just throw this out too. If any of the presenters want to have a last word or last comment about what you think you've learned from your vast experience, and if there's one thing you'd suggest to people, the key, please share.
This is somewhat related to a question that I'm sorry, I don't think I saw in full, but that I saw in the chat, which is it had to do with does it make sense to do affordable homeownership for low-income people? And does that work? And one of the things that I would say about it is that I think that the New York model really does prove that it works. But also that to work really well, it does require investment. It does require subsidy. I think that that often we kind of think about like, well, if it's homeownership, then shouldn't it be self-sustaining? And I kind of like to flip that on its head a little bit to think about like, why do we want for low income affordable housing just to be rental? The actual economics of low income rentals and low income co-ops are not that different. The tools that we have to do them are we have more tools for rentals. But even that in itself, the fact that we have more tools for rentals kind of speaks to a value judgment about we think low-income people should be renters. It does not cost more to make low-income people homeowners, like if the playing field is more level. So to have the tools to make that playing field level so that we make a subsidy investment and those people can have control over their homes, and which is really the biggest aspect of somebody's life. So to think of it as why not home ownership, I think is a really good focus.
I think that's a great point to end on, and I just want to thank everyone again. This is recorded. We will be sending you the deck, and reach out to any organization. There is so much information out there.